Welcome, friends. We are so excited to have you today for our Flavor Profiles workshop. This is one of my favorite workshops because it really breaks down the science of cooking. And my favorite thing to do is to teach principles, not necessarily recipes, because recipes I feel like can be confining and you can feel restricted to exactly what's on the page. But once you know some of the basic principles, the science behind your food, that really opens up a world where you can play and have fun in the kitchen. So we're going to talk about our 5 basic flavor profiles today, which is sweet, salty, bitter, sour. Spicy is kind of an outlier, but we are going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about savory, which oftentimes gets grouped in with salty, but is actually a little bit different. So we're going to break down each profile, talk about which each one is, and then how to cook combining the different profiles. We're also going to make one ethnic spice blend and then one spice oil that you can use to just jazz up your cooking at home. So to start with, we're going to start with sweet. We're starting with sweet because this is everybody's typically favorite profile. There's a lot that's attached behind it. Sweet, from a very basic perspective, is just the detection of sugar in your food. Obviously, that can come in the form of actual sugar, but there's other sugars that are present naturally in food as well. So fruit is a big one. We also have honey. We have some maple syrup here today, and then we have some jam. So all of these definitely fall into that sweet category. When we do this workshop live, I usually ask people what they think of when they think of sweet foods, and a lot of times sweet foods actually bring up specific memories. A lot of times around holidays like birthdays, birthday cake, Christmas, Thanksgiving. And the reason behind that is because not only are foods with sugar present at those special occasions, but eating sweet things actually gives us that emotion of feeling loved and cared for and safe, which is one reason why emotional eating can be a big thing, but also why there's so many happy feelings and memories associated with our sweet foods. One big thing with sweet foods is that they're tied to carbohydrates, and carbohydrates provide energy for our brains and for our bodies. So we crave those foods. They're a really necessary part of our diet. All right, we're going to move on to salty. Salty is, from a very scientific standpoint, the detection of sodium in your food. That's really important because your sodium balances out the water in your body. And since our bodies are made up of so much water, this is a really key ingredient in our food and in our diet. That can come in different forms, and salt is present in a million different things, especially processed foods. But it's really helpful as far as like cooking and learning the basics for several different reasons. For one, salt is a huge preservative, so that's really helpful. 2, salt actually brightens and enhances the flavors that are naturally present in your food. So a lot of times if you're cooking, you know you've added spices, you know you've added a lot of different flavor, but your food is still tasting bland. Most likely what you're missing is salt. So start there. But always start with less and add more. Once you add too much, it's really hard to make that adjustment. So I always go on the conservative side to begin with and then add more as I'm cooking until I get to my desired taste level. Salt, good salt, is palatable on its own. Like I would never just eat table salt by itself, but I would taste like pink salt, kosher salt. You can taste that just with your finger to your tongue, and it tastes okay. You can play around with salts. I usually prefer a coarse salt so that I can actually see it when I'm adding it to my food, which helps me to know how much I'm actually putting in. All right, moving on to sour versus bitter. A lot of times these two profiles get confused because they seem like they're really similar, but there's actually some key differences. So with sour, you're detecting acid in your food, which is why I've got citrus out, I've got vinegar, I've got plain yogurt. All of those things have a natural acid quality to them. And acid and fermentation is good for our digestion. It's really key. So when you taste things that are sour, there is a specific flavor that goes along with that, but it signals to your brain that this is good. This is going to help me in my digestive process. Whereas bitter, when you taste something that's bitter, that's actually a warning signal to your brain, like danger, danger, there's probably poison in this, because you're detecting toxins in the food, which is why bitter foods are oftentimes food that you have to acquire a taste for. It's not something that you're going to love from the time that you're a kid. You're going to have to build up a tolerance to it a little bit, like wine, green leafy vegetables, coffee, dark chocolate, etc. So those are the two key differences there. The one thing that's cool about bitter foods is that a lot of bitter foods actually are good for you because toxins can symbolize strength. So you can acquire that taste. It's just a little bit of mind over matter as you get used to the flavor. All right, so for our fifth profile, we're going to talk about both savory, which is what I learned in cooking school to be the fifth flavor profile, but we're also going to talk about spicy, which I don't really see as a profile necessarily because I think it's more of a temperature than a flavor, but it is a really important component of food and especially worldwide cuisines, and it has a big impact on the other profiles that we're talking about, so we're not going to leave it out. Spicy, again, is the detection of that temperature, which oftentimes comes from peppers, and that's what you're going to pick up, your palate is going to pick up. So we've got crushed red pepper flakes, hot sauce, Dijon mustard. Mustard is also definitely spicy. Horseradish would be another example, and some regular peppers. This is going to come into play a little bit later as we talk about how to combine these profiles. And lastly is savory, which is also oftentimes referred to as umami, but it's that satisfactory profile that feels very ambiguous and it's hard for a lot of people to describe. I usually ask in workshops, what do you think of when you think of savory? And people throw out like Thanksgiving dinner, I think of a pot roast, and start listing off like whole meals and not necessarily a specific item. And the reason behind that is because that's where that satisfaction element comes into play. So again, it's tied somewhat to a memory and not necessarily just to a flavor. But umami or savory is the detection of glutamate in your food, which comes from amino acids. And that's oftentimes tied to a protein. So eggs, nuts, meats, etc. That's where you're going to get that savory, satiating sensation from, and is why people think of a roast chicken dinner or Thanksgiving or pot roast, etc. All right, so now that we've gone through a little bit of a breakdown of each of these profiles, we're going to talk about how we can combine them. I've got these laid out on the counter like this flavor star that you're going to have in your packet, and this gives you some other examples of foods that fall into these categories. So this is a helpful way to remember which profiles enhance each other and which ones balance each other out. Enhancing meaning they brighten, they bring out those flavor elements. Complementing or balancing meaning that they tone down each other. So salty, sweet. These two profiles enhance each other when you combine them. If you start thinking about foods that are like sweet, salty, a lot of time candies come into play, like chocolate covered pretzels or peanut M&Ms. You've got the sweet, you've got the salty. Both of those things together are just going to make both flavors that much better. As far as balancing each other out, that's where some of these others come into play. So spicy. Spicy can be balanced out by sour. If you think about foods that you like that are spicy, oftentimes there's a sour element present. That's balancing out that spicy factor. So tacos, you have sour cream on top. Indian food, a lot of times they use plain Greek yogurt. You're taking a sour element, you're adding it to something spicy, you're going to bring that down, you're going to tone it down just a little bit. Sour enhances salty, bitter balances salty out, and back and forth. Sour and bitter actually also balance each other out. So we've got our green leafy vegetables here. A lot of times when you're cooking green leafy vegetables, you're adding a little bit of vinegar to it. The sour of the vinegar is actually going to balance out the bitter of the green leafy vegetable. Sweet can also do that with bitter. So chocolate, wine, again, adding a little bit of sugar to your green leafy vegetables when you're cooking them can help balance out the bitterness. All right, so these are your basic profiles. There's a lot that you can do mixing and matching, and I encourage you to spend some time as you're eating to just think about the way that those profiles are interacting. If you can combine more than one profile, it's going to be more satisfying to your tongue. There's a level of depth. There's just an extra element of satisfaction that's present when your tongue and then your brain can detect more than one profile. So it's fun to start to mix and match them. And this chart will help you a lot in learning how to do that and doing that comfortably. So we're going to move on to the next step, which is talking about some different spice blends and some different flavor oils that you can easily add to your cooking that you're already doing at home. Okay, so we're ready to make our spice blend and our flavor oil. For the Cajun spice blend, we've got paprika, we've got oregano, I've got black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, cayenne pepper. Those are going to be our main ingredients. And then for our oil, we've got olive oil, some chopped green onions, I've got hot sauce, lemon juice, and then we're going to use our Cajun spice blend that we've just made and add that to our flavor oil. So we're going to start with the spice blend first. All right, we're going to start with a teaspoon of paprika. I've got a million different measuring spoons on here, which is helpful and cumbersome at the same time. And then a teaspoon of oregano. We're going to do a quarter of a teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to eyeball this because I'm doing cracked black pepper in order to add just a little bit of extra flair. Whenever you get pepper that's already ground, it's lost a little bit of its pungency. That's about a quarter of a teaspoon. As we've talked about in some of our other workshops, I'm not super precise, which is why I don't do the baking at the restaurant. I just do the cooking so that I can play around. We're going to do a quarter of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. So that's our spiciest of the spices that are going into this blend. And then a half a teaspoon of both the garlic and the onion powder. If I can, there we go, find my half teaspoon. There's the garlic. And then we're going to do the onion. We are not adding salt to this spice blend, and that is super intentional. If you have bought spice blends at stores before, a lot of times salt is the #1 ingredient, and they do that because salt is the cheapest of the ingredients, so they're kind of ripping you off. Plus, it's harder to season the rest of your food if you're putting salt in with your spices. So I leave the spices just as they are and add salt separately. I feel like you get the integrity of the spices left as they are, and it's easier to know how much salt you still need to add left to your dish. Okay, so that's what our blend looks like. These are small batch recipes, and that's designed just to give you a very basis for a bunch of different ethnic spice blends, and then you figure out which ones you like, which ones you use the most of. You can double, triple, quadruple, whatever you want the recipes to get the amount that you need to have to keep your pantry stocked. All right, we're gonna move on to our flavor oil. So I've got extra virgin olive oil. We're gonna do 2 tablespoons in here. We're gonna do the juice of 1 lemon. I'm gonna squeeze that over to my hand just to catch the seeds that are coming out. And then the other half. It smells so good and fresh. Okay, then I've got green onions. This is about 3 green onions diced up, pretty small. I usually cut off the very tip at the top and then use all the way down to where it starts to turn white. If you have really large green onions, you can do less. If they're really small, you can do a few more. That part you can use your judgment on, because you don't want this oil to just be green onions with a little bit of oil on it. You want it to be balanced. Then we're gonna do a few dashes of hot sauce, the hot sauce of your choice. So again, you can do that as spicy or as not spicy as you want to. We're gonna throw that in. And then we're gonna add, I'm gonna do probably about half of this, but not all of it. So that'd be about a teaspoon or so. And whisk it to combine. All right, so here's our flavor oil. This will keep in the refrigerator for up to a week. And this is perfect for vegetables, fish, chicken. I love it on potatoes. And I love the Cajun spice blend for the same thing. And I like to keep this one in my cupboard because it just adds a little bit of extra pep to any meal. So I use this one a lot and I just keep it on hand. But I hope that today has helped free you up, figure out how you can play in the kitchen, and has given you some new profiles and some new spice blends to enjoy.